The painting that I've chosen today is Correggio's Education of Cupid, which is found in the National Gallery. And the reason why I've chosen this one is because I can see so many of my friends battling away with their children trying to educate them at home now that the schools have closed. So I just hope that this can provide a little bit of inspiration. The painting has a number of different names. It's known as Venus with Mercury and Cupid, or the School of Love, and also the Education of Cupid. And it was painted in 1525 or thereabouts by Correggio. Now, I wonder how many of you have heard of Correggio. He's not really a household name like Leonardo is, or Michelangelo, Raphael, Titian, but he was really groundbreaking and a very, very impressive Renaissance painter. But I think that because of the geography of where he was from, he was kind of missed off the tourist trail. So he was born in, well, as you probably guessed, he was born in Correggio, which is a small town that's just in between Mantua and Parma in northern Italy. And his actual name was Antonio Allegri, but he was known as Antonio da Correggio, Antonio of Correggio, just like Leonardo da Vinci, who was Leonardo from Vinci. And his most groundbreaking work remains in Parma, and because Parma was never really on the main tourist trail, he simply didn't become that famous. So if you go to Parma and you go into the main cathedral, you'll see his truly innovative painting. And this painting became the precursor to the great Di Sotto in Su, which means seen from below, Baroque ceilings in Rome. So here it is. It's a rather extraordinary, quite difficult to work out painting, but this is the dome of Parma Cathedral, and the painting depicts the Assumption of the Virgin. And you can just about see the Virgin kind of in the middle top part of that dome in red and blue, who's ascending into heaven by a throng of angels who are helping her up. They're all singing, they're playing musical instruments, and the dome of the church itself has been treated by Correggio as the vault of heaven. Now, he used foreshortening to such an extraordinary degree that it really seems illusionistic, and as though the figures are protruding out into our space. This was another way of using foreshortening. And yes, it is quite complicated, but it was entirely groundbreaking and very audacious as well. Now, in the next century, when we're fully into the Baroque period and the patrons and artists were looking for ultimate drama in the Baroque, they adopted Correggio's idea and totally ran with it. And the ceiling paintings that you find in Rome begin with an artist called Lanfranco, who learned from Correggio, and end with this Pozzo painting, the Triumph of St. Ignatius in Rome, and this is in the Church of St. Ignatius Loyola. It's painted on a flat ceiling. So you can see it's the most extraordinary use of foreshortening and illusionism, and actually at times it's horribly vertiginous as well. If you were to follow Pozzo around, he moved on to Vienna and he painted the dome of the Jesuit church there as well. And this dome was painted on a flat surface. It isn't actually a dome. And he was trying to create the illusionistic effect of a space that's protruding up into the sky. And he does it, but it only works from one point in the church. You have to stand in the nave at a particular point and then it looks quite right. But if you just move a little bit to the right or to the left or backwards or forwards, the dome gets steadily drunker and drunker, and you can see it's just a little bit tipsy here and is toppling over the side. Anyway, the point is that it all comes from Correggio, yet he was never really credited for it, and he was never credited as a great Renaissance painter. So we're not thinking about his illusionism today. We're thinking about all of those parents at home trying to teach their kids the school curriculum. So let's start off by looking at who is who. So mum and dad here are Venus, the goddess of love, and Mercury, the messenger god. And their little one is Cupid, the god of love. Now, Cupid's parentage is often quite confused. Some ancient sources say that his father was Mars, others say his father was Vulcan. But here, the patron has chosen Mercury. And we need to ask ourselves why, because it's quite unusual, not just this scene, but also to show Mercury as the father of Cupid. It's probably because in the 16th century, many humanists believed that the faculties of humans were under the influence of the planets. And one of the greatest Neoplatonic philosophers, a guy called Marsilio Ficino, talks a lot about how Mercury represented reason. We think that the painting was commissioned by a friend of the Duke of Mantua, and the Gonzaga court, the Gonzagas were the guys who ruled Mantua, was thoroughly intellectual. It was filled with the most incredible people. And this subject and Mercury's role as the rational god, I'm sure would have appealed to them. So here we can see Mercury not arming his son with poisoned arrows that are going to cause desire all over the place as Cupid shoots them out at people. But instead he arms him with a book, words, and he's teaching Cupid how to read. So Mercury's becoming the teacher, he's becoming the educator. And Cupid, who's really quite a rascal, is here, studious and calm, and it's unusual to see him like this. He's usually darting all over the place, causing complete havoc with his arrows. In fact, if we look back at the ancient sources, Homer talked about Cupid's power as being almost sinister, and Socrates, too, he described the impact of Cupid's love as being like the sting of a scorpion or being bitten by a venomous spider. And his name, by the way, comes from the Latin word cupido, meaning desire. But here in this painting for Correggio, his arrows are nowhere to be seen, and his mother, Venus, has confiscated his bow. I just want to have a look at the way he's been painted. I mean, in fact, you really need to see the painting in the flesh to get the true sense of how richly it's been painted. But that little Cupid is just completely delicious. I mean, look at that bottom, the little dimple on the side, and his flushed cheeks as though he's concentrating really hard, and he's using his fingers to try and make out the letters and the words, and you can just see the hand of Mercury up above him, helping him along the way with the tip of his right index finger, showing it all to him. And he has these amazing little wings, the colours which are picked up in his parents' clothes. You can see the maroon comes from Venus's drapery, the blue comes from Mercury's drapery, and the yellow comes from Mercury's hat. Coloristically, it's such an amazing work, and I love the way this soft, sunlit skin of all the characters is just kind of emerging softly from the darkness of the wooded area behind. It's so lovely. Now, if we look up towards Venus here, you can see that she's looking out directly towards us. Venus is usually quite saucy in these Renaissance paintings, but I think the overarching emotion here is pride, and the usual sensuality of Venus has been stripped away, and she's lovingly gesturing down towards her son. So she is drawing us into the painting by making eye contact with us, and then our eye travels down her arm to Cupid below. And I actually just want to think about this compositionally speaking, because it's a complete triumph. I mean, it seems like the composition is quite natural and quite effortless, but in actual fact, it is an absolute tour de force. So as our eye travels down Venus's arm, you can see how it gets picked up again by Cupid's arm below. And then it gets stopped at the elbow and it juts up off into the other direction, taking up diagonally right up Mercury's arm. So Cupid's little head is cocooned within these two protective parental arms, and it's at the apex of this inverted V. Meanwhile, Venus's left arm and the point of her left breast and the light that is captured within that breast leads our eye towards the shoulder bone and to the face of Mercury. And you can see his face is also caught in the light. He looks down at Cupid, directs our gaze back down towards Cupid, and then the cycle begins again. We move back up Cupid's arm towards Venus's right arm. This is just like the kind of thing that Leonardo was doing, and I wonder whether any of you listened to the Burlington cartoon talk that I did the other day, but you would have learnt how Leonardo was using exactly these techniques in his painting in order to take our eye around the painting, or the drawing as it was in Leonardo's instance. And Correggio is doing it here, like Leonardo, to emphasize the meaning of the work. And in this instance, it's a family unit, a loving family unit. Correggio was hugely inspired by Leonardo, as so many artists of this time were. There were so many things that he learnt from him. You can probably see from the way in which he used light and dark, this word that I introduced to you last time, chiaroscuro, chiaro light, scuro dark. The way in which forms can sort of softly merge together. This is the technique that Leonardo used that was called sfumato, this slight sort of smokiness. And he would use chiaroscuro and sfumato to gently, subtly mould the forms and to bring the characters to life through light and dark. If you look closely at the soft gold tendrils of Venus's hair, you can easily see this kind of delicacy in Leonardo's paintings as well. And perhaps most prominently, you can see that he's borrowed the really complex pose of Venus from Leonardo's Leda and the Swan. This is a really weird Greek myth, by the way, just as a little side point. Zeus transformed himself into the form of a swan, and he then seduced Leda, and Leda got pregnant and gave birth to Helen, whose beautiful face it was that launched 1,000 ships. So it is a bit of a weird story. Anyway, the pose of Leda here is extraordinarily full of this term called Contrapposto that I'm going to talk about in a minute. And it comes directly from the antique sources. So it comes from this Venus pudica, which is a figure of Venus stepping out of the bath and covering her body. So what is this contrapposto that I just mentioned? It's a term that, well, it literally means counterpoise, but it was something that the antique artists decided to sort of start using. They wanted to take their sculpture from this, much earlier on, back in the 6th century. You also find them in the 5th century, these standing curai, to something much more animated, much more realistic, like this. This is the Doryphorus in the Naples Archaeological Museum. Of course, he feels more alive, he feels more human, he's moving towards us. So how did the ancients do it? How did they create this contrapposto? We see that Doryphorus's left arm is raised, yet his right arm is down. His left leg is bent, his right leg is straight. His left hip is back and down, whereas his right hip is forward and up. His head's turned to the right, his chest is turned to the left. So it's all about balancing the parts of the human body in order to be able to animate it and give it life. And we can see exactly the same things being done with Venus's pose here. So her head is angled to the right, her left shoulder's pulled back, her left arm is straight, but her right arm is bent, right hip up and forward, left hip down and back, right leg straight and forward, left bent and back. And he's using this contrapposto in order to make the position seem lively. And actually, it's exactly the same with Mercury. The pose is just as complex. left leg back, right forward, right shoulder and arm back, left shoulder and arm forward. You can see exactly the same thing happening. And I think to work it out, Correggio would have done a number of different drawings. We know of one in particular in the British Museum print room. But we also know that, yes, he would have used these drawings, but he was working directly on the canvas as well. And from looking at x-rays, we know that he changed his mind with regards to the pose quite a few times. This idea was pretty novel at the time, by the way. It would have come from Venice and ideas that were beginning to form in Venice at this time. So the Contrapposto is really important for the composition of this piece. It's really important for bringing it alive. It probably has a companion piece, and this secondary painting on the right is in the Louvre in Paris. It's a completely different kind of painting. It's representing Venus and Cupid again, but they are both asleep, and this rather creepy satire is leering over them. He's actually just pulled back the cover that was covering Venus and Cupid as they slept. The satires are half man, half goat, and were always considered by the ancients to be extremely randy and extremely troublesome. So Venus is lying on the ground, and there's this rather weird feeling in this painting about it being both erotic and innocent, because after all she is asleep. But we, as the viewers of this painting, become voyeurs too in looking at her. And I think it's her connection to the ground that holds the key to all of this, because this Venus here in this painting represents a terrestrial Venus, an earthly Venus, which is representing earthly desires. And this is totally emphasised by that raunchy satire. But our Venus represents the celestial Venus, celestial love, and how the importance of knowledge can take you into the celestial realm with the gods and goddesses, whereas a preoccupation with terrestrial things keeps you stuck in the world of the humans. And these are exactly the kind of things that Marsilio Ficino and the humanists were contemplating. The power of knowledge, and how being armed with knowledge you become capable of anything. In fact, the northern courts of Italy were hugely intellectually competitive with each other. Think of the Medici in Florence, the d'Este in Ferrara, or the Gonzaga here in Mantua. They were all learning with a completely compulsive desire to seek and to find. Knowledge was so important. And it's really amazing today to look back at these guys and see how learning was just a critical part of their being. So good luck to all of those parents working with their kids at home. I hope it goes really well, and let's just hope this doesn't last for too long. In the meantime, if you'd like to hear some more films, please do visit our YouTube page, and you can learn more about the company Artscapes by visiting our website artscapesuk.com. Thanks so much for listening.